So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second day of our conference. We start the second day in a great way with our invited talk by Marieke van Erp that I'm pleased to introduce you. Marieke van Erp is the team leader of the Digital Humanities Lab, a lab within the Humanities cluster that is an alliance of 3 institutions of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, in which humanities research is carried out with advanced methods and in particular with computer science applications and technologies. Since 2005, she has worked on the intersection of language technologies, digital humanities, and cultural heritage. Indeed, her PhD thesis was about information mining on the collections of the Dutch National Museum of Natural History. And since 2009, she's been also involved in the semantic web community. In 2013, I had the pleasure of meeting and working with her in the Newsreader project, a very successful European project, which aim was to reconstruct news stories from the daily news streams with computational methods, NLP, so natural language processing, semantic web. As the head of the Digital Humanities Lab, she is also the co-organizer of several initiatives for the DH community. For example, the DH Benelux Conference, so the conference of the DH communities in the Benelux countries, but also the workshop on humanities and the semantic web, and the workshop on language technologies for social science, cultural heritage, and the humanities. She is involved in several projects in the Netherlands. Most of these projects are founded by the Claria initiative. And I would just to mention 2 of these many projects. One is the Evidence project that wants to use event modeling and semantic web technologies to analyze and contextualize historical sources. And another very ambitious project is the Amsterdam Time Machine. Today, our talk is about finding common grounds between text, maps, and tables for quantitative and qualitative research. After our talk, we will have a little bit of time for discussion, so write down your questions to make her some questions. And welcome, Marieke. Thanks for being here, and it's your turn.
Grazie mille per l'invito. Sono molto contento di essere qui. Non so più italiano di così. Devo continuare in inglese. Ma grazie. Yeah, so I'll be talking in English about digital humanities research in the Netherlands. If I would do it in Dutch, you probably wouldn't understand any of it. So to give you a bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about in this talk, so I'll first talk a little bit about the Dutch landscape. What it looks like, I'll explain the Claria project, also what the Humanities Cluster is about. Raquel already talked a little bit about it. And then I would like to present 2 different use cases, so 2 projects that we did within Claria. Actually, one is still running. And then a little bit about how our experiences in how the digital affects the humanities, and how the humanities affect the digital, because it's really 2-way traffic, and there's some challenges that we're still working on, and that I would hope to get your input on, because it seems that, for example, with teaching, you're maybe a bit ahead of us, but anyway, so maybe that's for the discussion. So the Dutch digital humanities landscape, it's very flat, the landscape, but there's a lot happening in digital humanities. So, as Raquel said, my research group, the Digital Humanities Lab, is part of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences Humanities Cluster. And the Royal Academy, the head is the king, here in the center. He actually came to visit our institutes this summer, which is very cool, where we got to present our work. So what is the Humanities Cluster? Some of you actually know and even collaborate with some of the institutes that we have. So it's 3 institutes that form an alliance. It's the Huygens ING Institute for History, Literary Studies, and History of Science and Scholarship. It's the International Institute for Social History, which is into social history. They also have a large archive, for example, about the unions in the Netherlands, but also about socialism, and all sorts of other things. It's very beautiful. They're housed in a cocoa warehouse in our former harbour district. And the Meertens Institute, which might be the one that you know, that is internationally least well known, but they're very well known in the Netherlands because they focus on Dutch language and culture. The institutes still exist as separate institutes, but in certain, for certain things they also really want to collaborate, and that's why they form this alliance. And my research group, the Digital Humanities Lab, is the first research group that is actually part of all three institutes and has the specific goal of connecting the digital humanities research across the different institutes, because there was already some digital humanities research happening in the different institutes, but just because you form an alliance and just because you put some of the institutes together in one building does not mean that people automatically will start working together. So this is really a structure to foster those kinds of collaborations. About the lab, we started about a year and a half ago, and we started kind of small, but with a very nice group. I'm very, very happy. So we've two really nice postdocs, Adina Nurgesh and Melvin Wevers. And we really focus in the first instance on language technology, because you can't do everything at the same time, and you can't start with everything. So we thought, well, let's focus on text analysis first, and then see where we can go from there. We are already very interdisciplinary because Adina has a background in social sciences and political sciences. Melvin was trained as a historian, but both got into digital methods. They can both program quite well. They're really interested in machine learning, really try to understand what's going on, not just take a tool and apply it. And Adina is also, for example, an expert on network analysis, which is actually something that is interesting to a lot of different humanities researchers. Because what we did when we first started, we actually went around the institutes to try to get to know everyone. And ask people, like, are you doing digital humanities research? Would you like to be doing digital humanities research? What kind of analyses do you do? What kind of methods could be useful to you? And you can, for example, in literature studies, people like to do network analysis on characters in novels. What kind of networks form there? What are the differences between different genres? Some of our historians are interested in the kinds of social networks that people in the past had. You can also look at networks of how particular concepts occur in text. So that is a method that is very useful to loads of different people within the institutes that maybe were not talking to each other before this alliance. And what is digital humanities? I mean, there's a lot of discussion still in the field on it, and we focus on these three things, because there's obviously technology involved, there's obviously humanities involved, and there's often lots of data involved. The nice thing about the humanities cluster is that we all have them in-house. So besides the researchers and besides my own research group, we also have a large digital infrastructure group. So developers who assist in projects and who create products that, so that when we build something in a project and the project ends, it doesn't just end up in a drawer and doesn't get used again. So we try to think about products and that if we build something in one research project, that we can continue developing it in the next project and maybe put a nice front end on it, put it on a big server so that, you know, it doesn't break if you put a lot of data into it. And we also have our own collections. So we also have a data management team to make sure that we align our data models, that we store things properly. We also have people digitizing things. Our audio collections have been digitized. We even had wax rolls for recording audio from way back when, but those have all been digitized. And we really try to bring them together. And I think that's also the theme of what we're trying to do in the Netherlands. Things are a little bit different than in Italy in many ways. The food is not as good, for example, but also we're tiny. So basically to get from the farthest northern part of the Netherlands to the southernmost part, it's a 4-hour drive, right? So that means that it's very, very easy for us to just physically go sit together and do something. And it doesn't mean that you can't do it if you're geographically further removed, as within a newsreader project. We had a great collaboration with FBK, for example, and also our partners in Basque Country. But sometimes it's just handy to sit together. So we have this big initiative called Claria, and some of you, it's like, oh, that kind of sounds familiar. Well, that's because the people who came up with it thought, hey, Clarin, that's interesting, and Daria, and we'll actually combine them in one project, and that'll be Claria. So that's a big research project in the Netherlands. There are more partners and more supporters of Claria, but these are sort of the research partners. And we've got a little corner here that's not covered, and here. Here there's actually Maastricht University, which we can maybe get on board at some other point in time. There's no universities here, but this is a really great place to go on holiday to. But we cover most of the Netherlands, and we can get to each other in about 2 hours travel. So that's very, very useful. And of course, there's quite the cluster here in Amsterdam and Utrecht. Utrecht's where the big Digital Humanities conference is going to be in June. So we are very, very happy that the Dutch Science Foundation has first funded the Claria Core project with almost 13 million euros a couple of years ago, and that they also funded the continuation of Claria, because we were definitely not done after this, which was another nearly 14 million euros. Now that is a lot of money, but when there's like 20, 30 partners involved and the money gets all divided over everyone over 5 years, it's not as if there's 10 researchers working on that full time. Also, actually, one of the things is that it's a lot of infrastructure. So we are working on ways to get the researchers involved as well. And then there's a thing, right? You first need to have some infrastructure to get the research really going and to show people what the infrastructure could do. Because I think that's a large part of digital humanities research, is that not all humanities researchers know what is possible with the technology. So you need some technology, and you need to make it usable, and you need to make it accessible, and then you can start having these cross collaborations to come up with new research questions and to really go further. And basically what we did, so Clarin is mostly linguistics, and then Daria is mostly other modalities. And then what we did, we divided the work into 3 content work packages initially in Claria Core, so linguistics, socioeconomic history, which is a lot of census data, for example, so a lot of tables, and media studies. And then it turned out in Claria Core that within the linguistics work package, there were people that are mostly focused on doing linguistics to help linguists, or language technology to help linguists, and people doing language technology to analyze historical documents or to apply this to literary studies. So that's why the linguistics package got split up into also a content of text package in going forward in Claria Plus. And then we also have, of course, a management package and an infrastructure package to make sure it gets all brought together. As I said, it's mostly an infrastructure project. So, but they also thought, well, you can't just build infrastructure for 4 years and then at the end give it to the researchers and say, now go have fun, go do digital humanities research. So there were 2 kinds of projects, Claria Pilots and Claria eScience Pilot. So we have an eScience center in the Netherlands. And researchers from anywhere in the Netherlands could come up with a research proposal in which they wanted to use to really test some of the Claria infrastructure to answer their research questions. So it's about 100,000 euros per project, running for like a year or so. The evidence projects is one of them, which I will not talk about during this talk, but feel free to come up to me afterwards. I'll be happy to share what we're doing there. And it's all over the place. You probably can't see this all the way at the end, but this is some of the presentations of the pilot. So here's a journalist, a professor in journalism, and they're trying to see how sports journalism has changed over time, how people report on football matches. And you see that in some eras, people put much more detail onto the kind of actions of the players, and it has changed, sort of more focused on the cards being given out and the bad behavior and those kind of things. Here, there's a researcher who is he's actually working on the Claria project. He's a language technologist, and he is very much an expert on post-OCR correction. But corpora-driven, so to correct all the OCR errors, or try to. And here, these are colleagues from the media suite. So that is one of the tools that is built to access and to view audiovisual materials. And part of, for example, the infrastructure that we needed to build was the Dutch National Audiovisual Archives are a partner in Claria. And they have a lot of copyrighted data that we can't just give out to anyone, but researchers can use it. Now, instead of having every researcher contact the archives individually, say, hey, I have a research project, I would like to use your audiovisual materials, we've set up a structure where everyone who has an institutional login to a Dutch university or research institute, they can log in through the website, and they will get access suitable to their needs. So obviously there are still videos that are maybe delicate, and other data sources that are delicate, but most of the data is just accessible if you are an employee of a Dutch research institute or university. So that makes it a lot easier for all parties involved. So that was a bit of a more general, like, hey, these are kind of sort of what is happening. But I'd like to dig into two different use cases. And the first one is really showing a bit of what linked data can do, and how it can help in search and query expansion, and especially through time. This is collaboration with Victor de Boer and Rinke Hoekstra. Can everyone read this at the back? It might be a bit small there, but so there's a question, what is a heikeuter? So the top is a local dialect text, which talks about a heikeuter. We don't know what this is. And because of the poverty of his soil, the heikeuter was still a long way away from the burghers of Venlo before he would see the benefits of his toil traded in against the bare necessities for a meager existence. Now, this is probably not someone who's doing very well in life, unfortunately. And our social historians, for example, they have this amazing resource. It's actually an international initiative, the Historical Occupations list. And there they have occupation names in various languages. And we also know what this occupation entails through time, because like a shoemaker, current day age, has different jobs or different activities than someone 200 years ago. So they do have some information about that. Also about status. I don't know how it is here in Italy, but it used to be that teachers used to have a lot of status, but in the Netherlands, but unfortunately not anymore, which I think is a big mistake, but that's just how society works. And it is actually available in various formats, among which SCOS, which is one of the semantic web formats. I won't go into detail about semantic web technology. It's great, it's fun, but you don't have to use RDF. But I think the concept of trying to integrate different kinds of data and also trying to think about how you can share your data model, how you can share your ontologies, I think is very useful. I can also totally imagine that in 10 years we think, RDF, what were we thinking? Why were we using that? So there won't be RDF in these slides. So this gives us basically our first puzzle piece, you could say. So in our work package 4, which is on social economic history, where we, for example, have loads of census data, but we have this amazing resource, HISCO. Now, we also want to see if we have relevant videos of or photo material of like people in certain occupations. So actually in our multimedia work package, we have the General Thesaurus Audiovisual Archives, GTAA, and there's a tool that's been developed called Culture Link, and you can actually use this to align different vocabularies. And we find in the General Thesaurus, through using this tool, that there are various other occupations mentioned, maybe through synonyms. For example, HISCO does not have all the feminine versions of teacher, so Dutch, I think like in Italian. So we have a masculine version of teacher and a feminine version of teacher. HISCO only has the masculine version. That is something that they're working on. And then, for example, the GTAA has both. So we can actually make that link and have more ways of expressing these concepts. So we have greater coverage. And actually it is linked to the different videos and other materials that they have at the Audiovisual Archives. So then we have enriched HISCO with these connections to these Audiovisual Archives and also the extra ways of expressing these different occupations. But GTAA and HISCO neither have a mention of heikeuter, so we still don't know what a heikeuter is. Luckily, our linguists at the Meertens Institute have created all these amazing diachronic lexicons. So we have, for example, a lexicon called Brouwers, which we converted to RDF. We converted to semantic web format using the Lemon model, which is just one of these models to express dialect information in semantic web. So you don't have to think about the model yourself, which is very nice. A lot of people have already thought about that. And so this is what HISCO has, and it has small farming, it has een kleinboer, een kleinlandbouwer, keuterboer. And our dialect lexicon, which also tells us, hey, this word was used in this particular location, at least we know it was used in this and this time. It actually has a concept keuterboer and a synonym heikeuter. So when we link this, we can actually find out that heikeuter is a small farmer. So for Brouwers, this is an interesting enrichment because it actually tells us something about the status of this occupation. It gives us more synonyms. It gives us information maybe about how much this person was making per year. And in this way, we can connect these things, and we can really do search that is sort through time, taking into account the different dialects that have been used, the different ways of expressing certain concepts in different localities in the Netherlands. So that's really helpful for us, and it's also an enrichment for all of these sources to have this connected. Now, the second use case is still very much ongoing work, but we're super excited about this. So I wanted to share some of the things we're doing here, and that's the Amsterdam Time Machine. Now, the Amsterdam Time Machine is not doesn't stand on its own, and this is a small pilot project within the bigger scheme of the things we're organizing in Amsterdam. It's also part of a larger EU consortium that's preparing a big call. I think maybe some of you might be involved. So it actually started with the Venice Time Machine by Frederick Kaplan, a researcher from Switzerland. And there's a big European consortium now that I'll put these slides online so you can see it, but it's timemachine.eu and you can see the entire consortium. So we have several research questions there, which may seem unconnected except for the fact that they have something to do with Amsterdam. But I hope to show through this example that even with these different things, we can connect across different humanities disciplines and make each other's work stronger. And I think there's a real value in that, and I don't think it's happening enough. Even within the Netherlands, we've got this nice little thing going on here, but I think we could do much more about that. So our first question is, can we map Amsterdam cinema audiences? I'll explain what we mean by audience in a little bit. Can we reconstruct Amsterdam dialects? Because there's not just one dialect that's been recorded. And can we measure social mobility? And I've added the work packages, so work package 4 again is social history, work package 3 is linguistics, and work package 5 is media studies. So our first puzzle piece from media studies. What are audiences? So we want to look at, just to sort of see what are the differences in audiences, what is going on, who goes to the cinema, when do they go to the cinema, what do they watch, where do they come from? And then there's different concepts, so we don't have information about individuals. Maybe a few reports, like, hey, in a diary or something, hey, I went to see this movie. There's also an imagined audience, and we can also look at economic or statistical audience, and that's probably one of the things that is easiest to do with this data that we have. And we have actually a beautiful database called Cinema Context. And actually, these slides are provided by my colleagues who actually did this part of the work. I was only involved in a very small part. Cinema Context, and it's basically a big database of Dutch cinemas. So where were they? When were they open? How many seats did they have? What were they showing? And for the movies, we also have them linked to the Internet Movie Database. So we know their genre, we know what actors played in them. But it doesn't really tell us much about who was going to these cinemas. What were the people? So our colleagues are looking at different ways of mapping this, and because we have the information about the cinemas, hey, we can see where these cinemas are. I don't know if you are familiar with Amsterdam at all. Basically, this part is the oldest part, and then actually, whenever the city grew, they added another canal and another circle and in some cases, a wall, but we didn't have that many walls, I think. This is currently where there's a big, where you can go out to party. And this is sort of the older area. There's the Haarlemmerstraat. There's actually still a cinema there. That's one of the oldest cinemas that's been open continuously. Now, if you look at seating capacity, sort of shows about the same thing. And also, what is interesting is looking at the film genre. Drama is the most popular. Now, to be honest, the dramas are not very, the genres are not very distinctive. So, but there seems to be one cinema here really focused on adventure and action, and comedies is really only happening here. We have to sort of dig deeper into the data and look at the actual distributions of the different films. But that sort of gives you an idea that's probably not the way where we're going to find the most discerning information about our audiences. What we can also do is add another source of information, and that is the tram lines. Now, what is interesting here is that we have the cinemas are from sort of between 1907 and 1928. We only have a tram lines map from 1921 that is sort of within this era. And we see that a lot of the cinemas, which are the yellow dots here, are located near tram lines. So it's very easy for people not from that neighborhood to go visit that cinema. That brings us to an interesting conundrum, like, okay, they're in this area. Are they attracting that audience, or are they attracting a different audience? So that's another thing about digital humanities, which is super interesting, and which is what not everyone, I think, sometimes realizes, that the answer is, the computer doesn't give you the answer. You still have to do the thinking yourself. But visualizing it like this can give you some insight and actually can bring some new research questions. Now we're looking at more data here. We can also look at the average house rent. So the darker the house, the more expensive it is. or the darker the area. Now also here this is one of the main things in this project, that we have bits of information from different times, and it's not always complete. So we do need to take into account how the city has changed, because we had some canals that used to be open and now they're streets. We actually built some extra bits, like we got the city expanded and those kind of things. And we also see that the cinemas are not in the most expensive parts of town. Maybe not a surprise, but it's good to realize. And also not in the super cheapest parts. So that is one piece of our puzzle. Like, we've got all this information about the cinemas, and we can connect it to information about the housing prices, about the locations that they're in. But we also have some information about language. So Amsterdam is tiny. Takes about half an hour to bike from the one end to the other end. But supposedly in 1874, there was a dialecticon published that said that there were 19 dialects in Amsterdam. And we were wondering, really? Can we actually find evidence for all these 19 dialects, actually plus 3 sociolects? And actually, as you can see here, number 16, for example, which is gebed zonder ens, which is prayer without end, which is the name of a street, it's maybe 200 meters. Like, did that really have its own dialect, is one of the things we were wondering. In this part of the project, we have a research assistant, Christel Doreleyers, and one of our professors who is very well known for this type of research in the Netherlands, Nicolien van der Sijs. We started looking for this. And we have all sorts of sources. We have primary and secondary sources. So we have letters, we have diaries in our archives. We also have writings about language, descriptions about neighborhoods, in which they sometimes mention certain words that are being used in this neighborhood, or certain ways people pronounce things. So vowel changes from one area to the other. This is something we haven't figured out how to convert to linked data yet, because RDF is all text. It's XML basically. But we also have recordings of speakers, which is quite funny if you actually speak the language. And we also, this is something that the Meertens Institute has done a lot, is doing surveys about all sorts of things, Dutch language phenomena and cultural customs and those kind of things. So we're using all that and basically compiling a big database, and we find things like that in Haarlemmerdijk, oi, they sort of pronounce it as ui, and then there's in the Jodenhoeks there's sort of an affix. So the Dutch would be ik ga, but they would say ik gaat, so they add a t to it, supposedly. So really, and then there's also the 3 sociolects. So that's not necessarily about a location, but about social status. And this is interesting to see, does that, for example, relate to how expensive an area is to live? Do people really speak posher there or not? So we have the Bargoens, which is the language of thieves and beggars, which have high class, which is generally thought to be in the Kalverstraat, which is one of the main shopping streets still, which is closely related to the Dutch standard language, you could say, but it has some French words in it because that was thought to be fancy. Right now it's super hot to use English terms, but it used to be French. And middle class, which we have the least data about, but that's interesting because it was probably the biggest class, but ordinary people don't write history, so that's a bit unfortunately. But because of the Meertens Institute, we do have some data about it. Not everything is digitized, but yeah. And then there's a lot of reading. Just a lot of reading, looking at the sources, noting down, hey, there's this word mentioned. It's mentioned here. Can we map it to one of those 19 neighborhoods? And then it's stored in a database along with like the lemma, like in standard Dutch. Any other information we have about it, obviously also in what source we found it. And So then there's all these variables, which I won't bore you with. So that is another piece of our puzzle. And the third piece is a social economic history. So we're looking at the elite. And our city archives, which are housed in a beautiful, beautiful building, you can just visit it. And they are digitizing loads of things. And our team from the social history use case, they're looking at, for example, who got to vote in 1854. So this is yet another year. They have digitized from different eras as well. And so this is people who got to vote, only men, I'm afraid, for the election of people for our parliament, our provincial government, and the municipal council. And the interesting thing here is that we now have street names in Amsterdam. In our linguistic use case, there were neighborhoods defined by the linguist. And here, actually, it used to be that Amsterdam had numbers for neighborhoods, but of course those numbers do not correspond to the neighborhoods that the linguist defined. So that is interesting there. So they have a neighborhood, which house it was in the neighborhood. They have their first name, their last name, their first name. Where were they born? When were they born? Where do they pay taxes? And how much taxes do they pay? So if we know how much taxes someone pays, we roughly have an idea of his income. And we also know where he lives, so we know which areas are the richer areas and which are the poorer areas. And this is in QGIS, which is a very standard geographic information systems application, where these are all dotted, but it's also in the background converted to semantic web, and you can do Sparkle queries. If you go to this web address, you can actually play with the data yourself. We can make a heat map of where all the voters lived. So now we have all these puzzle pieces, right? And how do we put them together? Because we've got our linguistic use cases, and that is sort of a visualization of our data model for the linguist. We have our cinemas, and this is a screenshot of one of the cinemas database page that actually tells you what was on. And we have our voter data. And then basically what we do, what these all have in common is they're somewhere on a map. Now, these maps don't align very well, so we have some super smart people at the Friese Academie, which is another Royal Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences institute, and they create this map. This is sort of a core map where every dot has information that says, well, on the 1854 map, this corresponds to neighborhood number 5, house number 45. And on our current, and these are the coordinates. And on our current day map, it's actually this street. And in our linguist map, it's actually this area. So every dot has just like a whole database field behind it with all this information. Now, I would like to have told you, like, here's a cool demo, and you can look at all the data, but on Tuesday, we're going to have a data sprint with the team to actually put some bits together and actually create some demos. So this presentation comes a little bit too early, but hopefully by the end of February, we should have this all wrapped up. And of course, we'll still continue the Amsterdam Time Machine Consortium. So this was only a small project in that context. But we also have a whole bunch of museums and archives around, like the Rembrandt Museum is, for example, part of this. So we're working with them to see if we can do other kinds of projects like this. But obviously, there's only so much you can do. So these were two kind of use cases that I hope show a little bit about how we can go across the different disciplines and also connect with computer science. This is very much focused on semantic web research, but there's also lots to be done with other computer science disciplines. But this is how just how it happened. So a little bit about how these interactions between more the sciences and the humanities, how they affect our daily practice. And this is mostly from our experience, so it might be different for you. And it's sort of a balancing act. I think there's loads and loads of opportunities. So, you know, because of these tools, digital tools, we can look at our data in a different way. We can scale up things, but also look at our research questions. Like, can we ask this? Because you can't ask the same questions to a tool as you know. Distant reading doesn't give you the same kind of analysis as close reading. So what is happening there, and how does that relate to our current methods? But there's definitely loads of opportunities for new and innovating research, and I think we're not there yet as a field. But I think when we get a bit further, we will be able to come up with new types of research questions that maybe now we couldn't have imagined. But I think we need a bit more mutual understanding of each other's tools and each other's culture, because there is very often a miscommunication. Computer scientists who, you know, a humanities person, this is a little bit how it sometimes works in the Netherlands, that the humanities person wants to do something technical and they go to a computer scientist and think, oh, but that's easy, because, you know, Google Maps has it all in your pocket, and then, you know, you got streets that disappear, or neighborhoods that change names, or you know, we actually created a whole province out of the sea that didn't used to be there a couple of 100 years ago. That kind of changes the deal a little bit. When we talk about modeling certain concepts. So humanities questions are super complex, which not every computer scientist appreciates yet. And that's mostly because maybe they don't talk enough. And there's a huge culture gap as well. For example, publication cultures. We see it now in our institute. We now have to make our reports, for example. And with my research group, I've published in a bunch of computer science conferences, which are about as important as journals, and about as hard to get into, because you actually write a full paper and it gets seriously reviewed, and 80% gets rejected. But in the report I got, like the sort of standard report, only counts journal papers as scientific output. Like, oh, hold on, right? And this is something that you have to be aware of, but it also changes how you collaborate, because actually, this is interesting. When I worked with biologists in the Natural History Museum, we got a conference publication, and you know, we wanted to put them on the author list because they had helped as domain experts, but they had rather not, because for a biologist, at least that particular subdomain of biology, they were only journal publications counted, and if you couldn't get it published in a journal, then you would go to a conference. So it kind of looked bad. So they had rather that we put them in the acknowledgements rather than in the list of authors. And those things you have to be aware of. But there's also great opportunities for humanities to affect the digital. And this is kind of cheeky because I put the same things on the slide, because I think the humanities has as much to offer to the computer sciences as the other way around. I think that's not always fully appreciated. So, for example, in the evidence project, where we're trying to figure out how the concept of violence changes over time in people's perception of it, and where we try to figure out what is an event. We still haven't figured it out. We're probably not going to figure it out in this project. We need a working definition, because the computer needs something, right? And in humanities, it's very often more gray, and it's not black and white. And computers have a hard time dealing with that. But thinking about these problems, I think for computer science makes, for example, us the modeling better in the end, or data models, and eventually the semantic web as well. A lot of the semantic web currently is very static data. If you go to DBpedia, you know, it's just one point in time. They talk about a person, and this person has a birth date, death date, his or her current occupation. maybe his or her previous occupations, but it doesn't really capture temporal information very well, or contradicting information, or things that are not quite, that can quite be captured as one entity. So those are things that I think would enrich both fields. And I think also in the humanities we do take more time preparing our publications, right? A journal paper, there's usually a longer process. You go and present the idea a couple of times, and then you write it, you get feedback from the community, whereas in computer science you write the paper, you submit it, and that's it. It's a different process. And I think we can benefit from both. To be fair, in computer science, there's also more collaboration going on. There's still humanities researchers who single author publications are very well appreciated, which is good in a way, but also it doesn't always stimulate collaborations. So what we're trying to do in our research institute is we drink a lot of coffee, and we organize sessions with people from the different institutes. So here at the table is actually all 3 institutes already represented. And we just have them talk about their research and try to find common ground. And we use up a lot of post-it notes where we have people first write down their research questions and the kinds of methods they're interested in, and then we try to mix them up together and get them to start talking to each other to really foster those kinds of collaborations and say, hey, go talk to this person, or hey, maybe you want to do something like this together, or we'll actually start a project with them. But that doesn't mean we've got it all solved. And I think the digital humanities as a field is still trying to figure itself out in some respects. And I think now is the time to ask ourselves, what do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And I think this was touched upon in the keynote yesterday as well, is about teaching. How do we go about it? Our staff is maybe not trained in digital methods, the current staff. I think for now, interdisciplinary collaboration, so teaming up with computer scientists and humanities people is a good way to do this. But it could very well be that in 10 years, we have researchers that can actually do both. But what does that look like, and how do we get there? Do we even want that, or do we think that interdisciplinary teams is the way to go about it? So I think there's still a lot of bridging to do. And I think also we should share our research better. I don't know how it is here, but in the Netherlands also the humanities kind of look up to the sciences sometimes, because they seem to be marketing their research better, but I think the humanities research is just as important, and we should be proud of it, and also, but also share within our disciplines more of our data, more of our methods, because I think we can actually learn from that. So, in summary, I hope I gave you a little bit of an overview of the Dutch digital humanities landscape. With 2 use cases that really focus on connecting data and methods across disciplines, where I hope that it shows that it really helps to see what you can do with the other data, and some chances and challenges. And I think the main thing is to keep talking to each other and to the other disciplines. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. A lot of open issues, a lot of things to discuss. So, questions?
Hello. Thanks for the talk. It was really nice and interesting. Well, my question is still a bit rough in my head, so I will try to start from your use cases. Okay, you said okay, we can use digital and we can use tools, but a lot of thinking is still in our head, right? Okay, so it's kind of you answered your last question, what digital humanities will be, and it seems it will be something that can support humanities and humanists, but would never take the place of humanists. But something that for me, I mean, in my opinion, is really interesting is to explore the extent that technology can help us to develop new heuristics to do actually our job, which means like how can we elaborate automatically new hypotheses. Okay, and I would like you to elaborate a bit more. Like, have you ever thought to work on that sense? And do you think it's interesting to work in that direction?
Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, the tools should be there to help us. One of the projects I'm doing now is with historical ecologists, and we basically built a classifier that checks whether a newspaper article is about an animal or not, about natural history or not, because in the Netherlands, a lot of last names, for example, could be animal names. So a person could have the last name Wolf. And before we did this project, when they wanted to see what kind of happened, what was reported on these animals in newspapers, they would actually go to a National Library's newspaper archive. They have loads of newspapers digitized from the 1600s on. And they would put in the query and they would read the first article. No, this is not about an animal, and they would go back. And so we built a classifier that basically takes away this boring stuff, right? But I think to think about, and that is something where what we can do now, and what we're very, what we can do reasonably well for certain things. I think what you're getting at is what I said a little bit a couple of slides back is. To come up with the new kinds of research questions that we can't come up with right now. These could be all sorts of things. I'm not sure if hypothesis is the same as a research question for you, but we're starting, for example, we put together people from our social history department talking to a literature scientist, and they both have an interest in slavery and how that developed. And it turns out that, you know, it could be very, very valuable for the social historians to see how stories about slavery are depicted in literature to form a more complete picture of that, to complement what they can get out of the reports they have from the East India companies and those kind of things. But what that looks like exactly, I find that very hard to imagine still, but I hope that we get some of these things very soon. So I don't have a conclusive answer yet, but I think we'll get there, and I think we need to, I think maybe the way to kickstart is to mix people up in really weird constellations and see what comes out of there, to really think outside the box, how we can do that. But that's hard, it's very hard.
Well, it's just an observation, but it has to do with the mutual influence from the digital humanities side to the humanities, and from the humanities to the digital humanities. Well, I don't see so much of a difference. I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not of the idea, like for instance, yesterday I focused on the new digital humanities. And in that perspective, I think that humanities will become digital. That's the basic idea of that approach. I'm not completely in agreement with that, as you may have noticed. But I think that digital humanities, also from your presentation, I think it's a step forward, respecting what was going on 5 or 10 years ago. When people were concerned about building data archives. Now the question is more, your approach, it seems to me, more, I would call it an interoperability concern to put data collection together. But the next step, I think, is to convince colleagues in the humanities to get something out of these data collections at disposal. That's the big problem, because at the moment, well, people describe the data set. They don't use it for research out there. That's the key problem to be tackled, I think.
Thank you very much. Indeed, in this presentation, I focused a lot on the interoperability. But at least in my institute, people are really looking at the data and digging into the data. For example, we have a historian who's working on maritime sources, and they, for example, describe where the crew on ships came from in different time periods. And he is creating visualizations of that, and he can really show that in a particular time, the crew came mostly from the coastal provinces, and 50 years later, they came from all over Europe. So yeah, first we need to have the data sources, and we need to have high quality data that is accessible, and you know, it unfortunately still happens that people say, yeah, sure, we have data, it's digitized, but it's not machine readable. It's like a stack of DVDs with high resolution images of the documents, but you know, it's very hard for a computer to actually make sense of that. But you're absolutely right that we need to also figure out how to get all the information out of these data sets. And I do think that we need to find a balance between the, can I say, traditional methods and our new methods, if I can call them like that, because I think it's always going to be an interplay between distant reading and close reading, where the computer is better at the distant reading, and I think for quite a while to come, the human will still be better at the close reading. So I think they need to coexist, but the digital should be just another tool available to the humanist to use at a particular time when the time is right for that particular tool. And for another part of the solving the research question, he or she should be totally fine with using a more traditional approach. And I think we need to make sure that people have an overview of everything that is available to them and what to use when. I hope that answers your question.
I was wondering, thank you for the wonderful talk. I was wondering, in what concerns the ATM project and Claria project you've been addressing, what was the money transferred or planned for the follow-up plans, which is, I think, a crucial question when it comes to developing both technologies and data sets which require maintenance, which very often is not planned in terms of governance. And this happens, at least to my knowledge, in most of the open source initiatives, which at some point simply expire because there's no money, which is channeled after the first startup allotment. Thank you.
Yes, that is a very, very valid question and concern. So, of course, it's always risky, and we don't know what's going to happen 10, 20 years from now. For now, the plan is that all the products created within Claria will be deposited at Clara and Eric centers. That basically means that they guarantee some sort of maintenance. Our data is stored at DANS, which is one of our archival institutions. And I briefly touched upon it at the beginning, is that our digital infrastructure department, one of its targets is to make sure that there is some sort of consistency. So we have programmers who go from one project to another instead of being hired for just a project, and that they develop tools in one project that are further developed in a project. Of course, it doesn't always work out, but that's how we try to do it. And I think also the Royal Academy Institutes can do this maybe a little bit better than universities because of the way we are funded. But it's definitely a cause for concern. But those are the plans we have, and if something better comes along, then we'll try that.
Hi, thank you for enlightening talk. I think that communication is the key. I completely agree. I think that, however, you touched upon a very crucial point, which is communication between humanists and IT people. I think that there is a professional profile that shouldn't be outside of the picture, that isn't outside of your picture, that is the digital humanist. There is a lot of talk about this always, that's always been, but I think there's a backlash now. People are starting to react from the humanities, starting to say digital philology doesn't exist, that's a quote, etc. And I think that on that table with that coffee, there should be, I mean, we build tools and we give them to the humanists. That's what the way to the pure humanist. There must be a digital humanist working in a collaborative project. We have this risk, this pitfall, that we have a table in which there are IT people, there are mathematicians in the pure sense, and humanists didn't talk to each other. The second pitfall is open source, right? Which is a good thing. I mean, the pitfall is not having open source. In the 90s, we have built the data, large archives, and now we are using them. Are we? Not always. Right? There has been a huge, I'm a Latinist, a classicist, I'm sorry. So they have built a lot of data archives on Latin and Greek texts, and we're only using Perseus and PHI, everything that's open source. I think that we should be clear about those two things, because there still are projects in which there are no digital humanists inside, and there are still projects that are closed source. I think we don't know what you make of this. Thank you.
Well, to answer your first question, the problem is that there aren't that many digital humanists yet. So I'm very, very lucky that the two postdocs that I have in my group, I consider them true digital humanists. But there's not that many, and this is something that that has been very, very difficult for us to attract students, because, for example, the history degree program doesn't attract enough students to have a traditional history program and a digital history or computational history program or literature or whatever. So we try to put them together in like a digital humanities program, and then there are people that come and say, well, I came for history, I don't come for humanities. It's not a thing that lives with the students yet, or the very young ones. So there's maybe a marketing problem. I don't know how. And there now is a digital humanities minor program at the Free University that is attracting some students, but it's only 30 ECTS. So you have to wonder how much you can do there, but it's a start. And I now have 4 of those students at my institute doing an internship. We'll have to see what comes out of that, but we need to crack that. And then I think the open source question is also very valid. And I'm personally in favor of as much open source as possible, but some data is very delicate. When I was working at the Natural History Museum, we had data about where certain very rare plant or animal species were found that we were not allowed to share because poachers might go there and actually make this species go extinct. We also have some researchers in our institute working on delicate subjects like populism, or looking into certain political things that, and they do interviews with people. We can't all make those available, so I think we have to find a balance there. But I would say, if there's no such concerns, then why are you not sharing that data? But that's also a cultural thing that needs to get ingrained into people's practice. I think the Dutch Science Foundation, when you now put in a project proposal, you have to have a data management plan. You have to explain why your data is not open. And if you don't have a good reason, well, sorry, you won't get this funded. So, yeah. which is maybe not the way to do it, not the friendliest way to do it, but